this video, we are going to discuss to you the Module 2, which is about broodstock management. But before we start, let me first introduce my group mates. My group mates are Miss Irene Rose Balingquacas, Mr. Alexis Don Zambales, and Mr. Ray Bensulan. In the management of broodstock, it should be taken into consideration the selection of suitable broodstock management, nutrition, and environment. Selection of suitable broodstock. So there are some characteristics of main species that we must consider for the selection of suitable broodstock. These are the size at maturity, the method of reproduction, the location in the pond and the feeding behavior, and the tolerance of adverse conditions. Size at maturity. Reaching maturity does not mean that fish produce already many eggs. For example, in the silver barb, let's take a look at the picture there. A fully matured silver barb can produce 300,000 eggs per kilogram of body weight. This is the case of 2 or 3 years old fish weighing 1 kilogram or more. By comparison, 4 fish weighing 250 grams each and thus totaling 1 kilogram will produce only 100,000 eggs. This is because their ovaries are still small. This situation is not unique to the silver barb, but it is true for every species. The weight and age for full maturity is different for every species. A fish is likely to reach maturity faster if it is grown in good condition, let's say no stress and good feeding. In the selection or when selecting a suitable broodstock, the age and the size and not only the total weight of broodstock must be considered. Next is the method of reproduction. For Indian and Chinese carp, they cannot spawn naturally in culture ponds, and their spawning season is restricted to rainy season, which is from June to August. And since they are large fish, they produce many eggs. It is actually similar for large barbodes broodstock, who also produce a large number of eggs and can spawn between May to September. For tilapia and common carp, they have the capacity to spawn almost throughout the year. Tilapia can spawn naturally several times in the year, but only few fingerlings are produced at a time. For common carp, they usually spawn well without hormones if any kind of artificial substrate such as plastic grass, floating water plants, etc. is provided. So here we can take a look at the picture at the side. There we have an example of the common carp, and below that is an example of artificial substrate. So spawning for common carp can even occur without substrate. Period of reproduction lasts about 9 to 10 months, which is around January to October. This requires broodstock to be sexed early in the season or even kept separated throughout the year, which is from November to December. For the silver barb or barbodes, the injection of hormones to females is usually required for spawning, and natural spawning is much less likely to occur. They should also be separated early in the season, which is from December to January, to prevent natural spawning in the broodstock ponds. The picture there is an example of the silver barb. Next is the location in the pond and feeding behavior. Grass carp and silver barb live near the surface where they usually find macrovegetation. Silver barb also feed on plankton to some extent. Silver carp feed on plankton, particularly phytoplankton in medium top level. Bighead carp and catla live at the same level but filter zooplankton more than phytoplankton. For rohu and mrigo, they live closer to the pond bottom and feed on rotting plants and decaying organic matter on the bottom of the pond. Plankton is also used to some extent. Common carp lives at the bottom and at the perimeter of the pond where it forages the soil for finding insects, small animals, and decaying vegetation. It is less selective when compared to rohu and mrigo in for its feeding. So tilapia. Tilapia explores all levels. It filters plankton and feeds on insects, small animals, soft plants, and etc. From all those characteristics that I've mentioned, it appears that fertilization of the pond, especially organic fertilization, is important to all species by increasing the amount of natural food present in the pond. Grass carp is the species the least likely to benefit from fertilization. Some species have the same feeding habits and therefore should not be stuck together as they will compete for food. If stuck together, the total stocking density should be decreased. Good examples of this are tilapia and silver carp, which feeds on phytoplankton. So tilapia and silver carp, we should not put them together. Another example is the grass carp and silver barb, which both feeds on plants. Migral, rohu, and common carp feeds on the bottom. Tolerance of adverse conditions. In normal conditions, all species are generally resistant to diseases and no real problem of disease concerning broodstock have been reported. Most species are less resistant when water quality decreases and especially in cases of low level of oxygen or important variations of it. Common carp and tilapia are the most tolerant species for low levels of oxygen and generally poor water quality. Poor water conditions will, however, affect the fecundity or the fertility of every species, and it should be remembered that overfertilization should be avoided to prevent stress to the fish. Here we have the characteristics of the main species that I have mentioned. It is like the summary of their characteristics, so we can compare them. So tilapia and common carp, as well as silver barb, takes 1 year to reach maturity, while rohu, mrigo, katla, bighead carp, as well as the silver carp and grass carp, takes 2 years to reach maturity. Here are some of the pictures of the species mentioned. We have here the catla fish, common carp, silver carp, roe fish, mrigo fish, as well as the grass carp. So if you ever wonder what they looks like, here they are. Next we have here the hereditary qualities. Just like any other animals, the traits from broodstock or the parent fish will also be manifested in its offspring. Therefore, a healthy and sound broodstock will also give offspring of the same qualities. Few of key important traits are rapid growth, disease resistance ability, harsh conditions tolerance. Some other traits include strong appetite as well as feeding habits.
Broadstock management. Next na! Broadstock management are
involves manipulating environmental factors. From the word broodstock, it these are a group of mature individuals used in aquaculture for breeding purposes. So, broodstock can be a population of animals which is maintained in captivity as the source of replacement for or enhancement of and seed and fry numbers. So for broodstock management covers the three particular aspects of rearing process.
Next, the three rearing process of broodstock management are the selection of fish with desirable hereditary quali- qualities.
This aspect is typical of improved strains such as rapid growth potential, higher resistance to dissolved oxygen deficiency and adverse water quality, with strong appetite, and it is an omnivorous feeding regime. The selection of fish will develop sexual organs. And the last of aspect is the rearing of this selected fish is this aspect is to produce healthy potential spawners with dormant eggs well developed in the female. That is the particular aspect. For the advantage of the broodstock, managers can select for reproductive characteristics
which influence the egg producing capability of individuals and increase fecundity by providing them with optimal environment and diets. So it is means by this is a further possible in pond rare populations where traits can be selected for over generations. Next is the breeding season. Next advantage is the breeding season and spawning times can be shifted, thus expanding the seasonal range of the production. This advantage leads to more efficient aquaculture because fry are available to the market year-round. For the purpose of broodstock management, the main species can be classified according to the size at maturity, then the method of reproduction, which is the natural, the semi-natural, and the artificial,
then the location in the pond and feeding behavior, and the tolerance adverse conditions. The size at maturity, the purpose of size at maturity is in the Indian and Chinese carp are species that mature at a large size, about 2 kilogram, and needed to be kept for at least 2 years
in the pond before becoming productive.
It has already probably the main reason for the poor success of that species in government hatcheries. So, the size at maturity is these large species should preferably be stocked in large and especially in deep ponds. Then the method of reproduction is this requires that broodstock of common carp should be
Sexed early in the season or even kept separated throughout the year, which is only in November to December. However, natural spawning
is less like much less likely to occur. The injection of hormones
to females is usually required for spawning
they should also
to be separated early in the season. It is December to January to prevent natural spawning in the broodstock
pond. For the location in the pond and feeding, not all species live in the same place in the pond and where they live is linked to what they like to eat. They feed on rooting plants and decaying organic matter on the bottom of the pan. For the tolerance of adverse condition, in the broodstock is in normal conditions, all species are generally resistant to disease and no real problem of disease concerning to broodstock have been reported. Most species of this tolerant of adverse condition are less resistant when water quality decreases and especially in cases of low level of oxygen or important variations of it. So for the broadstock pans,
Next, for the broadstock pans, the main characteristic, there are two characteristic of broadstock pans, which is the main characteristic of it and the layout of pans. The main characteristics,
pans should be rectangular shape with no exceeding to 20 meter for easy netting operation. They must be drainable in order to assist collection of all fish and correct pan preparation or application of lime and manure. Draining by gravity is recommended.
so the main characteristic is there should be water inlet and outlet system for water control. Water inlets should have a protection or screening device against unwanted fish. Water depth should not be less than 1 meter and should be preferably between 1 to 2.5 meter. The main reason for this is that water conditions should be as stable as possible during the months before spawning.
This is possible if water volume is large. Next is layout of pans. For layout of pans, on a sloping site,
Nursery ponds must be located in the highest areas. Grow out span one step lower and broadstock ponds in the lowest area. The primary reason for this is that nursery ponds must be provided with the best possible water without any possible contamination or which is transfer of disease
from broadstock pans to nursery pans.
So this kind of layout of ponds may also allow to draining of the nursery ponds, which is that are well fertilized into grow out or broadstock ponds, reducing the amount of water and fertilizers needed. So the broadstock ponds of these kinds of characteristics should be carefully watched to avoid poaching. So next,
Next is for the stocking of broadstock. Stocking of broadstock have four kinds of broadstock. The rate base four kinds of bases for stocking broadstock. Rate, separation of sexes, separation of species, and the number of species. Rate, fish are stocked and maintained in good condition. So the conditions are water depth is advised previously 1 to 2.5 meter and should be kept constant throughout the year. Next condition is fresh water should be readily available in case of problem. Then water needs to be of good quality and properly fertilized so that it is rich in natural food. The next condition that we need to maintain is fish are given supplementary feed as described in next section. For this kind is of rate is a common stocking rate is 1,000 kilogram of broad fish per hectare, which means 10 kilogram over 102. If any of these conditions cannot be achieved for whatever reason, the stocking rate of broodstock must be decreased. Next is the separation of sexes.
Separation of sexes. Fish that do not reproduce naturally in pond can be stocked with mixed sexes. So, it may be advisable to stock the sexes separately in order to take better care of the females, because females require better quality feed for developing the gonads. Separation of females will reduce the cost of broodstock feeds, since males can be fed on inferior diet. Example, the tilapia, silver barb, and common carp can be bred in the pond and sexes, should therefore be stocked in different ponds for maintenance period. Then, ideally, there should be two ponds for maturing fish of both sexes and two ponds for spent fish. By doing this, there can be a more efficient use to feed. Females being given protein richer feed. So as a pond's numbers are often limited, females and males could be mixed after spawning, but always in a pond that will not be seen in the next month. It may be advised to stock a few 200 hectares small purely carnivorous fish for controlling unwanted fish that may consume broodstock feed.
The next is
Separation of species. Separation of species. Naturally, breeding species should be separated. In case of shortage of space, it would be better to keep the same sexes of two species in one pond than the two sexes of a single species. Such a system still avoids wild spawning, but allows feeding females of both species with a suitable diet. Species with different feeding behavior, which is silver barb and common carp for instance, will also consume different natural food in pond. So, the problem when mixing different species is that disturbs the ponds frequently, as not all species will be ready for breeding at the same period. That is the problem of separation of different species. So for the number of species,
all former considerations should lead to limit the number of species.
present in hatchery, according to the number of ponds, their size, and their water capacity. No fixed rules can be given here. In some stations with limited ponds areas, or problems with water supply, two species should be a maximum. Tilapia can be added as reproduces naturally. So, for the number of species, you should control the number of the species you will put to the hatchery. And that could be all for the broadstock topic, and thank you.
So, okay, this is my topic, which is the nutrients or nutrition rather. So, next. Uh, Nutrition, or what is nutrition? It is defined as a critical part of health and development. Also, it is the process whereby living organisms use food for maintenance of life, growth, and normal functioning of organs and tissues, and the production of energy. So, uh, there's some essential nutrients that the fish and other aquatic animals or the broodstock needed. So, proteins, initial essential amino acids like fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. Animal protein versus vegetable protein are important of dietary calcium level in fish nutrition, differences in natural requirements during different life stages in and in different system of culture, maintenance, ration, and growth ration, feeding experiments, and determine optimal levels of nutrient requirements, control experiment, and feeding experiment. So, sources of nutrients in naturally produced food in ponds, extra food produced through fertilizing and supplement feeding, complete artificial feeds. So, uh, nutrients has a requirement. So, immature fish intended for use as broodstock should get a protein that is rich in protein and well-balanced diet because it is the period of laying down the germinal tissues which contains the future egg stock. If possible, they should be selected early and stocked with broodstock females that receive the best feeding. So the process of that is the after spooning. The broodstock are stressed and tired and have lost weight. The females especially need abundant feeding in order to recover. Then they start again to produce ova. Some species will stop the development of ova during the cold season, and others will continue the development until spawning. So during the resting period, fish needed or need feed with more than 50% of natural organisms that is rich in protein and 50% of artificial feeds rich in energy like rice bran, broken rice, corn, and others. So when birdfish are in the last phase of oval development, they need to have feeds rich in proteins in the percentage of 30 to 40%. This will avoid the accumulation of fat in the ovaries. So year-round broodstock and one-time broodstock do not have the same feeding diet or dietary feeding. And diet should vary throughout year, meaning the feeding process is, um, is important to not change the 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 feed that is being feeded to the fish. It must be a uniform in feeding for the whole year in the recovery uh, process of the fish. So this is also shown that broodstock should better not come from or be mixed with the other feeds like commercial stock, which receives a poorer and more uniform feeding. It either costs too much for producing table size fish or does not prepare the broodstock properly to their function. Uh, Grass crop is one of the feeds which is often grown together with the other species. The barbodes, these are the species that is native only in the Asia. These are the small fishes or fish. Also should be given aquatic feeds, vegetables, or other soft terrestrial grasses chopped into small pieces. So here broodstock nutrition have also the effect. So the effect is reproductive physiology of the broodstock and in turn their ability to spawn and reduce good quality gametes. And also the quantity of the egg, the quality of the egg, and in turn to the quality of the yolk sac fried or the larvae, or and in turn into the initial performance of the first feeding larvae fry before they become established of feed. So let's proceed to the feeding. First here is the effect of feeding. So the effect of feeding is deficiencies in diet on growth, health, and survival, effect of diet on the yield of remarkable production from the feed animal, dressing percentage and percentage of edible flesh in live animals, and dress carcass effect of diet of the composition of gain in respect of proteins and fat, effect of diet in causing the off flavor. Next is the next slide is the evaluation of fits. So there are three main components in evaluation of fits. First is the conversation rates and digest digestibility of feeds. Next is the feed analysis and the analysis of fish. So in a conversion rather rate and digestibility of feed, uh, is a method of assessment. Factors affecting conversion rate, such as the composition of food, size and feed animals, frequency of feeding, water quality, temperature, and etc. Conversion rate, rates of commonly used feeds, gross energy and percentage of available energy in various types of feed materials, relation of available energy to fabric contents of feed, coefficients of digestion, use of indicators and digestibility studies, biological value of proteins. So in the feeding analysis, for determining the for determining the feeding analysis, there are two components, which is the dry matter, the ash, proteins, lipids, and fabric, and the gross energy, the minerals such as the calcium and phosphorus, and the vitamins. So analysis of the fish is for determining the dressing percentage, composition of gain, and presence of absence of off flavors. So in artificial feeds, there are two components: the criteria of choice of feed and the different kinds of artificial feed. So in the criteria choice of feeds, is the acceptability, digestibility, nutritional value, digestion, coefficient, conversion rate, availability, the cost, and other more. The different kinds of artificial feeds. So first we have the vegetable fish or the organic, the agricultural waste, including oil cakes and meal residues, plants processed cereals, tubers, and chicken waste. Another more. Second is the feeds of animal origin, slaughterhouse, house, slaughterhouse, refuge, fishery byproducts, including the trash, fish, and fish meals, other waste, and the other waste of fish. So the next is the um, compounded feeds. Compounded fish are feeds. So the advantage of the compounded fish is the advantage and need for compounded feeds, including medicated feeds in aquaculture. Second is the feed formulation. Feed formulation in relation to species to be feeding habits, age and size of animal system of culture and availability or otherwise of natural food, uh, a general composition of compounded feeds like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, cellulose, minerals, vitamins, binders, and waters. Ingredients commonly used: survey of locally available ingredients and their nutritional value. Protein source: animal proteins versus plant proteins or the other cheap sources of proteins. Factor determining feed and ingredients characteristic: protein, fat, fiber, texture, tendency, the color, and the carbohydrates. Addition to the medicaments of the combating diseases. Next is the third one is the feed manufacture. Feed mills and their designed component parts of the feed mill line. Pellet mill, colored crumbled rolls, shifter and elevator. Production flow, importance of steam condition in pellet mill operation, consistency, water stability, texture, and particle size. Binders uses different forms of compounded feeds and fillet, expanding pellets, crumbles, block, and agglomerates, agglomerates, agglomerates. Factors determining pelleting rates and pellet quality to protein, fat, fabric, and tendency. Use of pelletability chart, packaging, storage, and conservation. So the next is the feeding procedure. Feeding procedure, there are two main factors, which is the method of feeding and the feeding schedule. In method of feeding, there are two types. So first is the fresh feed. Feeding enclosures for floating feed. Feeding basket, trays for soak feed. Feeding at the selected points of the broadcasting. The second is the dry feeds, mechanical dispensers, automatically feeds, mixing the ingredients and demand the feeders. Next is the scheduling, a feeding schedule, a daily ration in relation of water temperature, the size of fish, and the type of feed. Adjustment in feeding schedules to suit temperature and feeding conditions. So the last is the economic aspect of different types of artificial feeding, feeds and feeding. So here is the practice on how to feed or on how the formulation or the preparation of feeding. For selected fish based on locally available ingredients, observation of animals feed manufacture in a feed mill, feeding experience to study digestibility and conversion rate of selected feeds. And that's all.
Good evening, good day, classmates. My report is all about environment on the Broodstock. First, we will have a description about environment. All living and non-living factors affecting in organisms and ultimately determining its form and survival is known as environment. All external factors influencing the life and activity of people, plant, and animals is known as the environment. The complex of physical, chemical, biotic factors affecting an organism and ultimately determining its form and survival is known as environment. Then fishes live virtually all aquatic habitats, differently species of fish and adapted for different habitats. Rocky rocky shores, coral reefs, keel, forests, rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds. Undersea ice, deep sea, and other environments of fresh salt and brackish water are known as the environmental habitat or of fish. And we'll proceed to the next slide. Next slide, please. This in this slide, we will tackle about environmental factors. First, we have topography, soil, base level, temperature, population density, food pollutants, and parasites. Next slide, please. In topography, the elevation or height of the pans or cultured site is very important as it affects the environmental phenomenon occurs. Topography of the pans is very important for the broodstock because um, as it as it defend the cultured species for the environmental occurrences like the wind, the storm, as the as the many more occurrences of the environmental effects like strong wind or the storm. So like many as like as like of the pans in the Sea that there are so many mangroves that it will cover the strong wind, so there will be no disturbances of the or disturbances that make the stress of that make the fish stresses on the pan. So it will really help the fish to survive. Next page, please. Next, soil. The quality of the soil are important as it defends the cultural species. The rigidity of the dikes prevent the environmental occurrences. We have three types of soil: sandy, loamy, or and clay. So the dikes of the pond will really others the types of the soil of the pond will help the cultured species for the phenomenon occur to the ponds of the environmental occurrences. So next page, please. We have pH level. If the pH of water is too high or too low, the aquatic organisms living within it will wait, I saw next sa back. pH level organism living within it will die. Also affect the solubility and the toxicity of the chemicals and heavy metals in the water. The majority of the aquatic creatures prefer a pH range of 6.5 as if it is the range it will survive the survival of the cultured organism, though some can live in water with pH levels outside of the range. Next, please. Next slide. We have population density. Population density of the environmental on the cultured on the broodstock 1,000 kilogram of brood fish per hectare is the common common density of the cultured species, which means 10 kilogram per 100 meters per meter squared, so that fish are stocked and maintained in good conditions. Water depth, as advised previously, 1 to 2.5 meter and should be kept constant through the year. Fresh water should be readily available in case of problem, so that there will be presence of phytoplankton for the primary food of the broodstock fishes. If any of these conditions cannot be achieved for whatever reason, the stocking rate of broodstock must be decreased or failure. Next page, please. Next page. Pollutants. These are made both human and cultured species for human activity in the form of feeds or any chemicals used in plants. For the cultured species, their waste body parts are like carbon dioxide exhaled from the respiratory system of the fish. As you can see in the figure,
Ika
next
mo
slide.
ingon dira ka gud.
The next slide, we will tackle about pollutants, the environmental factors. Uh, these are made by human and cultured species for human activities in the form of feeds and chemicals used in the plants for cultured species. For the cultured species is their waste body parts and carbon dioxide exhaled. And as you can see in the figure, is the all about the pollutants from for the environmental factors. And we will go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Next, next. Next slide,
Parasite na
dudes.
parasite. Parasite na.
Hello, next slide.
Ray, parasite na ka Ray.
Dudes, next, dudes. Uh, on the last part of the environmental factors, we have parasites. These organisms is one of the main cause problem in the parasites of the fisheries, as they invade species causing disease that leads to death. Parasite is an organism that lives on a or in a host of organisms and gets its food from or at the expense of its host. Parasites is one of the most dangerous the failure that cause one of the causes that the cultured species can cause failure on the name of the catch, because it can it can decrease the amount of catch harvest and catch, because it can cause many diseases that can cause death or to many fishes cultured in the pond. So it is one of the problem in the fish farming. And that's all. Thank you for the environmental factors for the bird stock. Thank you.